The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was filled with beings from 100 different worlds. Light from 3 artificial suns poured through crystal windows that stretched 1,000 feet high. The floor was made of stone taken from the oldest planet in the known galaxy. Every detail of this place was designed to remind visitors of the power and age of the civilizations that ruled the stars. Daniel. Harris walked alone down the central path. His footsteps made small sounds against the ancient stone. Around him, alien delegates watched with expressions ranging from boredom to mild curiosity. A human coming to speak was not an important event. Humans never had anything important to say. The Velthri sat in the highest seats as they always did. Their 4 eyes tracked Daniel's movement with the lazy attention of predators, watching something too small to eat. High Counselor Vethrok, leader of the most powerful empire in the galaxy, leaned back in his chair and waited. His gray skin caught the light, and the ceremonial marks on his face showed his 2,000 years of age. Daniel reached the speaking platform and looked up at the assembled powers of the galaxy. The Keth delegation sat to his left, their insect-like bodies perfectly still. The Moravian collective occupied the seats to his right, their pale forms communicating through subtle color changes in their skin. Dozens of other species filled the remaining seats, each one representing civilizations older than human history. For 300 years, humanity had been part of this council. They had joined as newcomers, eager and hopeful. They had learned the languages, studied the customs, and worked hard to prove themselves worthy of respect. They had taken the jobs no one else wanted. They had solved problems no one else would touch. They had served faithfully and asked for little in return. And for 300 years, they had been treated as something less than equal. Daniel cleared his throat. The sound echoed in the vast chamber. A few delegates looked up from their private conversations. "I speak today on behalf of the United Human Worlds," Daniel said. His voice was calm and steady. "I come to deliver a message of farewell." The word took a moment to translate through the various systems. When it did, a few delegates showed confusion. Farewell was not a word often used in council business. "Humanity has decided to leave the Galactic Concord," Daniel continued. "We will be departing within the year. All human citizens will be withdrawn from council space. All human businesses will close their operations. All human representatives will return home." Silence fell over the chamber. Then, slowly, laughter began. It started with the Keth, their clicking sounds filling the air. The Velthri joined in with their deep rumbling. Even the usually quiet Moravian flickered with colors of amusement. High Counselor Vethrok raised one of his 4 hands. And the laughter faded. He looked down at Daniel with something like pity in his ancient eyes. "Little human," he said, "where exactly do you think you will go? The galaxy is vast, and you have no territory of your own. You have no fleet worthy of the name. You have no resources that we have not given you. What do you imagine you will do without our protection?" Daniel did not argue. He did not defend humanity's capabilities or list their achievements. He simply nodded politely. "We thank the Council for 300 years of hospitality," he said. "We wish all member species well in their future endeavors. We hope that our departure will cause no inconvenience." He bowed once, as custom required, then turned and walked back down the central path. The delegates watched him go with expressions of disbelief. Some were still laughing. Others had already returned to their private conversations. Dismissing the announcement as some kind of human foolishness, High Counselor Vethrok watched until Daniel disappeared through the great doors. Then he waved one hand dismissively and called for the next item on the agenda. The matter of human departure was not discussed again. 6 months later, the last human ships gathered at the edge of council space. Admiral Laura Bennett stood on the bridge of her vessel, the Horizon's Edge. It was not a warship by galactic standards. It had no weapons that could threaten a Velthri cruiser. It had no shields that could withstand Keth's assault craft. But it was human-built, human-crewed, and human-owned. That was enough. Around her ship, 3,000 other vessels waited in formation. Cargo ships loaded with supplies, transport ships carrying millions of colonists, research vessels packed with equipment and data, Everything humanity had accumulated over 3 centuries, everything they had earned through their labor and sacrifice, was loaded and ready to go. Lieutenant Kevin Porter stood beside the Admiral, studying the tactical display. The young officer had been born on a Velthari mining station. The child of workers who had spent their lives in the deep tunnels, he had never seen Earth, but he had heard stories. All human children heard stories. "Do you think they will try to stop us?" he asked. Laura shook her head. "They do not care enough to stop us," she said. "We are leaving quietly, paying our debts, fulfilling our contracts. There's nothing for them to object to. To them, we are simply removing a minor inconvenience from their lives." Kevin looked at the star chart showing their destination, the Galactic Rim. Regions so far from the center of power that no great empire had bothered to claim them. Regions with difficult conditions, sparse resources, and no strategic value. "The Council thinks we are fools," he said. Laura smiled. "Let them think what they wish. We have learned everything we needed to learn from them. Their technology, their science, their methods. But more importantly, we have learned what kind of civilization we do not want to become." She gave the order, and the fleet began to move. 3,000 ships turned away from the glittering heart of the galaxy and headed toward the darkness of the rim. Behind them, the great empires continued their endless games of power and prestige. Barely noticing the departure, on a small Moravan trading station, a dock worker named Pale Light Swimming watched the human ships pass. She had worked beside humans for 40 years. They had helped her when she was sick. They had taught her children when no Moravan school would accept them. They had been her friends in a galaxy that did not encourage friendship, cross-species lines. She raised one pale hand in farewell, though she knew no one on those ships could see her. "Safe travels. Little ones," she whispered in her own language. "I think you know something the rest of us have forgotten." The human fleet passed beyond the range of her station's sensors and was gone. Pale Light Swimming returned to her work. But she kept thinking about the strange quiet that now filled the corridors where human voices had once echoed. She wondered if anyone else would notice. She wondered if anyone else would care. In the great hall of the Galactic Council, the seats reserved for human representatives remained empty. No one removed them. No one filled them. They simply sat there, day after day, a small reminder of a species that had chosen to walk away from everything the galaxy had to offer. The great powers did not understand the choice. How could they? Power was everything. Territory was everything. Military might was the measure of all worth. They could not imagine that a species might value something else entirely. They would learn. In time, they would all learn. But by then, it would be far too late. 10 years passed, and the galaxy continued to turn. The Velthari expanded their mining operations into the sectors humanity had left behind. The Keth absorbed abandoned trade routes and added them to their commercial networks. The Moravan archived human cultural data in their vast libraries, treating it as a curiosity from a minor species that had made a foolish choice. Life went on. The great powers assured themselves that nothing important had changed. Trade. Minister Cathal was the first to notice the problems. He sat in his office on the Keth homeworld, surrounded by screens showing economic data from across the empire. The numbers told a story he did not want to believe. Trade negotiations were taking longer. Much longer. Deals that once closed in days now dragged on for months. Disputes that would have been resolved over a single meal now escalated into formal complaints and counter-complaints. The flow of goods across the galaxy was slowing down, and no one seemed to understand why. Cathal had the records searched. He had analysts study every trade route, every merchant contract, every negotiation from the past 50 years. The pattern emerged slowly, but once he saw it, he could not unsee it. Human merchants had handled nearly 40% of all interspecies trade. Not because they controlled any markets. Not because they had special technology or secret advantages. They had simply been trusted by everyone. When a Velthari and a Keth could not agree on terms, a human broker would step in. When a Moravan shipment was delayed and blame needed to be assigned, A human arbitrator would sort it out. Humans had been the neutral ground where species that hated each other could still do business. Now that neutral ground was gone. Cathal wrote a report for the Sovereignty Council. He recommended immediate efforts to recruit replacement mediators from other minor species. The council read his report, thanked him for his diligence, and did nothing. They were Keth. They did not need outsiders to conduct their business. 3 years later, the first trade war began. Dr. Megan Cole had spent 30 years working in Velthary Medical Research Institutes. She had been good at her job. Very good. Our work had contributed to breakthroughs in genetic therapy, disease prevention, and life extension. But she had always been listed as a support technician, never as a researcher. Her name never appeared on publications. Her ideas were always credited to her Velthary supervisors. She had not complained. That was not the human way. She had simply done her work, helped her colleagues, waited for the day when things might change. When humanity announced its departure, Megan was among the first to leave. Her Velthary colleagues did not try to stop her. They barely said goodbye. She was, after all, just a support technician, 5 years after her departure. The Velthary Genetic Research Initiative collapsed. The scientists could not understand what had gone wrong. They had the same equipment. They had the same methods. They had the same brilliant minds that had produced centuries of breakthrough discoveries. But the discoveries stopped coming. An investigation was ordered. Researchers were questioned. Records were examined. Slowly, a picture emerged. The breakthrough discoveries had not come from individual genius. They had come from collaboration, from the small connections between different projects, from the questions that no one else thought to ask, and those questions had always come from the humans. Megan Cole had never been a genius by Velthary standards. She had simply been curious about everything. She had wandered between projects, asking why things were done certain ways, suggesting connections between unrelated research. Her Velthary colleagues had tolerated her interruptions without realizing how much they depended on them, without the curious human asking inconvenient questions. The brilliant Velthary scientists settled into their separate specialties and stopped talking to each other. The great discoveries required collaboration, and the Velthary had forgotten how to collaborate. Similar stories emerged across the galaxy. The Keth shipyards, once the most efficient in known space, began missing production targets. Investigation revealed that human supervisors had been quietly resolving disputes between worker castes, preventing the small conflicts that now grew into major disruptions. The Moravian communication networks, which connected 1,000 worlds, began experiencing unexplained delays. Analysis showed that human technicians had been maintaining backup systems that no one else knew existed, systems that had been preventing failures for decades. Everywhere the investigators looked, they found the same pattern. Humans had been doing essential work that no one had noticed or valued. They had been the invisible foundation holding countless systems together, and now that foundation was gone, on the border between Keth and Moravian space. Tensions had been rising for decades. A disputed star system, rich in rare minerals, had been claimed by both powers. Negotiations had been ongoing for years, but progress was slow. In the old days, human diplomats would have been called in to mediate. They had done it 100 times before. Patient men and women who would sit in meeting rooms for months, listening to both sides, finding common ground, crafting compromises that let everyone claim victory. The conference rooms sat empty now. When the first shots were fired, both sides expected someone to intervene. Someone would call for a ceasefire. Someone would propose talks. Someone would remind them that war was expensive and pointless, or that compromise was always possible. No one came. The war lasted 8 years. 14 billion beings died. Worlds that had been inhabited for 100,000 years were reduced to ash and rubble. The Keth sovereignty lost a third of its fleet. The Moravian collective lost to core worlds. When it finally ended, both sides were exhausted and impoverished. The disputed star system remained disputed. Nothing had been gained. High Counselor Vethrak watched the war from afar. He had sent no Velthary forces to intervene. It was not their conflict, and the Velthari had no interest in spending blood and treasure to save other species from their own. Foolishness, but privately. In the quiet of his chambers, he began to wonder. He composed a message to be sent toward the Galactic Rim, toward the dark regions where humanity had gone. The message was carefully worded. It was not a request for help. It was not an admission of need. It was simply an invitation for human representatives to return to the Council as observers. If they wished, the message traveled for months across the vast distances of space. It reached relay stations that human technicians had once maintained. It passed through communication networks that were already beginning to fail. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the rim, human receivers detected the message. It was logged, analyzed, forwarded to the appropriate authorities. No response was sent. High Counselor Vethric waited for a reply that never came. After 6 months, he stopped waiting. He had more important matters to attend to. The economy was slowing. The research initiatives were stalling. The military alliances were fraying. He told himself these problems were temporary. The galaxy had existed for billions of years before humans arrived. It would continue to exist long after they were forgotten. He almost believed it in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council. The empty human seats began to gather dust. No one cleaned them. No one remembered why they were there. The galaxy continued to turn, and the shadows continued to grow. 20-5 years after humanity departed, the lights began to go out. It started slowly, so slowly that no one noticed at first. A communication relay in Sector 7 went offline. A navigation beacon in the outer territories stopped transmitting. A power grid on a minor colony world experienced unexplained failures. Each incident was small. Each incident was handled locally. Each incident was forgotten as soon as it was resolved. But the incidents kept happening, and they kept getting worse. Chris Palmer had spent 15 years as a communications technician on Station Verith 7, a massive relay hub that connected 300 star systems. He had been one of the last humans to leave when the departure began. His Velthari supervisors had barely acknowledged his farewell. He was just a technician, after all. Anyone could be trained to do his job. The station had sent him a message 3 years after his departure. A polite request for technical documentation. He had sent everything he had. 5 years after that, the station sent another message. Less polite this time. They were experiencing system failures they could not explain. Could he provide remote consultation? Chris had declined. He had a new life now, a family, responsibilities. The galaxy had made its feelings about humans very clear. He owed them nothing. 10 years later, Station Verith 7 went silent. 300 star systems lost contact with each other. Millions of ships were stranded without navigation data. Trade routes that had operated for 10,000 years simply stopped working. The Velthari sent investigation teams. They found the station intact but dead. Every system had failed in sequence, like dominoes falling one after another. The Velthari engineers studied the wreckage for months, but they could not understand. What had gone wrong they could not understand because they had never learned how the station actually worked. The station's original builders were long extinct. The technology had been inherited, not invented. For thousands of years, mixed-species crews had maintained the systems. Passing down knowledge from generation to generation, humans had been part of those crews for 3 centuries. They had learned every system, documented every procedure, created backups and redundancies that no one else knew about. When the humans left, they took that knowledge with them. They had offered to train replacements. The offer had been declined. The Velthari did not need humans to teach them anything. Now the station was dead, and no one knew how to bring it back to life. Similar failures began occurring across the galaxy. Communication networks fragmented. Navigation systems became unreliable. Power grids failed without warning. The great civilizations that had ruled the stars for 100,000 years found themselves struggling to maintain the basic infrastructure of their empires. The problem was not technology. The problem was culture. The Velthari were brilliant engineers, but they only studied Velthari technology. The Keth were master builders, but they only built according to Keth's designs. The Marevan were experts in information systems, but they only trusted Marevan methods. Each species had developed in isolation, proud of their own achievements, dismissive of others. When they needed to work with alien technology, they had always relied on intermediaries, species who were willing to learn everything, to bridge every gap, to connect systems that were never meant to work together. Species like humanity. War. Coordinator Ryan Scott had tried to warn them. 20 years before the departure, he had written a detailed report on the vulnerabilities of galactic infrastructure. He had mapped every critical system that depended on human maintenance. He had calculated the cascade failures that would occur if those systems were neglected. The report had been filed and forgotten. Ryan Scott was just a human. What could he possibly know about the great civilizations of the galaxy? Now his predictions were coming true, one by one, and there was something else. Something worse. The Hollow had been dormant for 10,000 years. Ancient records described them as a plague from beyond the galaxy, a force that consumed civilizations and left nothing behind. The great empires of that era had united to drive them back, building vast defense networks along the galactic rim. Those defense networks had been maintained ever since. Mixed species crews had guarded them, watching the darkness for any sign of movement. Humans had served on those crews for 3 centuries, taking shifts that no one else wanted, maintaining systems that no one else understood. When humanity departed, the defense crews were restructured. The remaining species divided responsibilities according to their own preferences. The Velthari took the weapon systems. The Keth took the sensor arrays. The Marevan took the communication links. No one took responsibility for coordination border. Station Krath-9 was the first to detect the anomaly. Something was moving in the darkness beyond the rim. Something large. The station commander, a veteran Keth officer named Sketh Roll, immediately tried to alert the central command. His message never arrived. The communication systems were experiencing delays. The backup channels were offline. By the time his warning reached anyone who could act on it, 3 days had passed. In those 3 days, the Hollow consumed 2 border stations and began moving toward the inner galaxy. Emergency councils were called. Fleets were mobilized. Defense plans that had been prepared for 10,000 years were activated. Nothing worked. The Velthari weapons could not track targets without Keth's sensor data. The Keth sensors could not transmit without Marevan communication systems. The Marevan systems could not process information fast enough to coordinate a response. Each piece of the defense network was functioning, but no one knew how to make the pieces work together. Admiral Vethkrol commanded the first major engagement against the Hollow. His fleet was the finest the Velthari had ever assembled. 1,000 warships, each one carrying weapons that could crack planets. The battle lasted for hours. Vethkrol's ships could not coordinate their attacks. Orders were delayed. Targeting data was corrupted. Ships that should have supported each other instead fired into empty space while their allies were destroyed. When it was over, 800 Velthari warships were gone. Admiral Vethkrol was among the dead. The Hollow continued its advance. In the Great Hall of the Galactic Council, emergency sessions ran day and night. Species that had been rivals for millennia now desperately tried to cooperate. But cooperation required trust. Trust required time they did not have. High Counselor Vethrak sent more messages toward the galactic rim. No longer polite invitations. Now they were pleas for help, offers of anything humanity might want. Promises of respect and equality. The messages disappeared into the darkness. No response came. Somewhere beyond the rim, in regions the great powers had deemed worthless, humanity was building something new. They had taken everything they learned from the old galaxy and used it to create a civilization of their own. A civilization based on cooperation, on adaptation, on the simple belief that every person had value regardless of their species or status. They knew about the Hollow. They had detected its movement long before the inner galaxy. Realized the danger, they knew about the desperate messages from the Council. They had discussed what to do, and they had decided to wait. The galaxy had made its choice 3 decades ago. The great powers had dismissed humanity as insignificant. They had laughed at the announcement of departure. They had refused offers of help and training. Now they would learn the cost of that arrogance. The darkness continued to spread, and the lights continued to go out. 50 years after humanity departed, the Velthari Dominion prepared for war. High Counselor Vethric stood before his military commanders in the great war chamber of the Velthari homeworld. Around him, holographic displays showed the advancing hollow forces. 12,000 star systems had already fallen. Billions of beings had been consumed. The darkness was spreading faster than anyone had predicted. But the Velthari were not afraid. They had ruled this galaxy for 100,000 years. They had survived wars, plagues, and disasters that would have destroyed lesser species. They had the most powerful fleet ever assembled. 12,000 warships, each one a masterpiece of Velthari engineering. Victory was certain. It had to be. The fleet departed in perfect formation. Velthari precision was famous across the galaxy. Every ship knew its position, its role, its target. The commanders had studied the Hollow for decades. They understood its patterns, its weaknesses, its limitations. What they did not understand was themselves. The first engagement began well. Velthari weapons tore into the Hollow formations, destroying hundreds of enemy vessels. The commanders sent victory reports back to the homeworld. The darkness could be stopped. The Velthari would save the galaxy, as they always had. Then the communication systems began to fail. Ship captains found themselves unable to contact their fleet commanders. Fleet commanders lost contact with each other. Orders that should have been received instantly took minutes to arrive. In space combat, minutes might as well be years. The Velthari had always relied on centralized command. Their admirals gave orders, and their captains obeyed without question. The system worked perfectly when communication was instant and reliable. But communication is no longer reliable. Captain Vetsara commanded the battleship Eternal Dominion. She was young for a Velthari officer, only 400 years old. But she had earned her position through skill and dedication. When her communication links failed, she did what her training told her to do. She continued executing her last orders and waited for new instructions. Her last orders had been to advance to Position 7 and engage enemy forces there. By the time she reached Position 7, the enemy forces had moved. The allies who were supposed to support her had been destroyed. She found herself alone, surrounded by hollow ships, still waiting for orders that would never come. Eternal Dominion was destroyed in minutes. Captain Vesara's final transmission was a request for clarification of her orders. Similar scenes played out across the battlefield. Velthari captains, trained to obey without question, followed obsolete orders into ambushes. Supply ships arrived at coordinates that had already been overrun. Reinforcement fleets moved to support positions that no longer existed. The Hollow did not use centralized command. The Hollow did not give orders or follow plans. Each vessel acted independently, responding to threats in real time. Coordinating through methods no one understood against such an enemy. Velthari precision was worthless. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, 11,000 Velthari warships had been destroyed. The greatest fleet in galactic history had been reduced to scattered, survivors fleeing into the darkness. High Counselor Vethrak received the reports in silence. His 4 eyes showed no emotion. His ancient face revealed nothing. He had ruled the Dominion for 800 years. He had seen crises before, but he had never seen anything like this. He ordered the remaining fleets to fall back and defend the core worlds. He sent messages to the Keth and the Moravan, proposing a joint defense alliance. Old rivalries no longer mattered. The survival of all species was at stake, the Keth agreed. Their own fleets had been mauled in border skirmishes with the Hollow. The Moravan agreed as well, though their forces were smaller and less experienced in warfare. Together, the 3 great powers assembled a combined fleet of 8,000 ships. This time, they would coordinate. This time, they would fight as one. They tried. They truly tried. But coordination required more than good intentions. It required common communication protocols, shared tactical doctrines, compatible command structures. It required trust built over centuries of cooperation. The great powers had none of these things. Keth. Captains refused to take orders from Vel-3 admirals. Marevan ships could not interface with Keth targeting systems. Communication between species was slow and filled with misunderstandings. Each fleet fought according to its own traditions, and those traditions did not mesh. The combined fleet held the Hollow at bay for 3 weeks. Then it broke. The Keth sovereignty fell first. Their homeworld was consumed, along with 90% of their population. The Keth who survived scattered to refugee camps on distant worlds. Their great civilization reduced to memory. The Morvan Collective lasted longer, but only because they chose to flee rather than fight. Their core worlds were evacuated, their populations relocated to hidden colonies on the galactic fringe. They survived as a species, but their power was broken forever. The Vel-3 Dominion stood alone. High Counselor Vethrak made his final stand on the homeworld. The orbital defense platforms were activated, systems that had not been used in 10,000 years. The population was mobilized. Every Vel-3 who could hold a weapon pressed into service. It was not enough. On the last day, Vethrak sat in his private chamber and composed a message. He no longer expected a response. He no longer hoped for rescue. He simply wanted someone to understand. The message was not addressed to humanity. It was addressed to whoever might find it in the ages to come. A confession, a warning, a final reflection from a being who had lived 2,000 years and learned wisdom too late. We believed that power was the measure of all things, he wrote. We believed that those who ruled were worthy of ruling, and those who served were meant to serve. We looked at the humans and saw only weakness. They had no great fleets. They held no vast territories. They conquered no worlds. We did not see what they truly were. They were the bridges between us. They learned our languages when we would not learn each other's. They understood our cultures when we refused to understand. They solved our problems and asked for nothing but fair treatment. When they left, we laughed. We thought they were fools running to die in the darkness. Now I understand. They were not running. They were walking away from fools. If anyone finds this message, learn from our failure. Power means nothing without wisdom. Conquest means nothing without connection. The strongest civilizations are not those that dominate others, but those that bring others together. The humans understood this. We did not. We are paying the price for our blindness, Vethrak. Sealed the message and placed it in a stasis pod designed to survive anything. Then he walked to the balcony of his chamber and watched the sky burn. The Hollow descended on the Vel-3 homeworld like a storm. The orbital platforms were overwhelmed. The defense forces were scattered. The population that had ruled 100,000 stars for 100,000 years was consumed in a single night. High Counselor Vethrak died with his people. His body was never found. Across the galaxy, the great civilizations that had dismissed humanity fell one by one. Ancient empires became dust. Proud species became memories. The darkness spread until it consumed everything the Council had once ruled, and somewhere beyond the rim, in the regions no one had valued. Humanity watched and waited. Their time was coming. 100 years after humanity departed from the Galactic Council, a small ship emerged from the darkness of the rim. Captain Nathan Brooks stood on the bridge. Watching the stars of the inner galaxy appear on his screens, these were the same stars that his great-great-grandparents had left behind. The same stars that had watched over empires older than human history. Now those empires were gone. The ship moved slowly through the wreckage of what had once been Vel-3 space. Debris fields stretched for millions of kilometers. The shattered remains of warships drifted in eternal silence. Planets that had once glowed with the lights of cities were dark and cold. Nathan had studied the Vel-3 all his life. He had learned their language, their history, their art and philosophy. As a child, he had dreamed of visiting their homeworld. Walking through their great libraries, seeing the wonders they had built over 100,000 years, now there was nothing left to visit. Dr. Amy Turner led the historical team on the expedition. She joined Nathan on the bridge as they approached the Velthury homeworld. Her eyes were filled with tears as she looked at the readings. "The atmosphere is gone," she said quietly. "The surface has been sterilized. There is nothing alive down there." Nathan nodded. He had expected this. The reports from long-range sensors had prepared him for what they would find. But expecting something and seeing it were different things. "Begin the documentation," he said. "Record everything. We owe them that much." The ship descended through the dead atmosphere and landed in what had once been the capital city. The great council hall was still standing, its crystal windows shattered, its ancient stones cracked and burned. But the structure remained. Nathan walked alone through the empty corridors. His footsteps echoed in spaces that had once been filled with the voices of beings from 100 worlds. He found the chamber where his ancestor had delivered humanity's farewell. A century ago, the human seats were still there. Dusty and forgotten, but still there. He sat down in one of them and looked up at the empty hall. The Velthury seats, the Keth seats, the Moravian seats, all empty now, all silent. He stayed there for a long time, thinking about everything that had been lost. Humanity had built their new civilization in the regions the great powers had dismissed as worthless. They had found resources the older species had overlooked. They had developed technologies the established empires had considered impossible. They had created a society based on cooperation, where every person had value regardless of their origin. And when the Hollow came for them, they had been ready. The war had lasted 3 years. It had been the hardest thing humanity had ever done. They had lost ships, colonies, millions of lives, but they had not lost each other. Human fleets did not rely on rigid command structures. Every captain could coordinate with every other captain. Every engineer understood multiple systems. Every soldier could adapt to any role. When communications failed, they improvised. When plans fell apart, they created new ones. The Hollow, which had consumed 100 ancient empires, broke against human determination like waves against a cliff. Now, a century after their departure, humans returned to the galaxy they had left behind, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as caretakers. Dr. Turner spent months on the Velthury homeworld, leading teams that documented everything they could find. Art, literature, scientific records, personal journals, anything that survived the destruction was carefully preserved. On the Keth homeworld, human archaeologists excavated the ruins of the great hive cities. They found records of births and deaths, of marriages and celebrations, of everyday lives that had been cut short by the darkness. Each record was cataloged and stored on the Moravian colonies. Human diplomats made contact with the survivors who had fled before the fall. The Moravian were few now, their numbers reduced to barely 1 million. They were suspicious of the humans at first, remembering how their ancestors had treated them.